My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
And my name is Pixel Patch. I'm a joyful geek with an expertise in gaming, both tabletop and video.
Our mission is to bring nerd culture to the masses.
And by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, TV, mega comic books, or is that graphic novels, cartoons, groups, that's animation, Disney, Star Wars, Dragon Ball Z, Pokemon, and Digimon, and Mighty Morphin, Power Rangers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Yu-Gi-Oh! And Nintendo, Cinematic Universes, Marvel, DC, Justice League, is Batman, Leagues with Superman, Flash, Wonder Woman, Avengers, Iron Man, Captain Jack, Loki, Spider-Man, and Hulk and Logan, X-Men, Battlers, Allen, Galaxy, Guardians, Star Trek, Prick, Prick, Card, and Janeway, Nerds and Geeks from gather around and join them in the Big Bad Shark, Average Joe and Pixel Patch, they peek under the microscope.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd culture under the microscope.
And this morning we had to drag the nerd culture out of bed so we could get it there. My goodness.
Yeah, you had to use your Google Home to set an alarm for it.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. And I've turned it off, so now I can say, okay, Google, and nothing will happen. Wait. No, we're good. We're good.
Unless you're listening in the presence of a Google device, in which case we've now activated it. So,
how to overthrow the government. Oh no, you're on the list. Oh, run! Go to New York and hide in Hell's Kitchen.
You're rocking your, what is this, your armor sweater?
Yeah, it's a World of Warcraft hoodie. The company that was making it went out of business, so I got it for super cheap.
Do you mean the company that made World of Warcraft went out of business?
No, just the company that was making the sweaters.
Oh, okay, because I feel like that would be more noteworthy.
Yeah, no. Blizzard has gone out of business. Go to Google, everyone. Actually, okay, Google, has Warcraft gone out of business? Uh-oh, my phone activated. No, turn off. Oh!
So we had some people message us this week to let us know that our episodes, if you're using Apple Podcasts or Spotify, have been cutting out after an hour. I have looked into it, and hopefully the fix I've done will resolve it. So I apologize to anyone who was right in the middle of our Avengers conversations and then got silenced.
Yep.
It was not intentional,
Nope.
but hopefully it works out this week. And if it continues to be a problem, please tell us again, and I will try my best again to solve it.
We will work tirelessly at the wee hours of the morning, screaming at our servers.
Oh, I'm gonna tire full.
Oh, very nice, very nice.
Full of tires.
All right, a black suit and everything with a wrench.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, cool.
We're also away from our regular Bat Jar studios. We're at your place today.
Yep.
So
It's
we'll
nice.
most likely hear people just kind of meandering about.
The steps and the steps, but that's right. It is the livelihood of the world around us. We are in a true location outside the Bat Jar. Yeah, there you go. Just listen carefully for the footsteps, everyone. Now listen as the window slowly opens and the breeze wafts through.
So here are our news stories we can talk about today.
All right.
We can talk about where Avengers Endgame is currently sitting with its box office.
Oh, all right.
We can talk about the latest news about Quentin Tarantino's Star Trek movie.
Ooh, okay.
Or we can talk about the reaction the internet had to the Sonic the Hedgehog trailer.
I mean, that's been terrifying, and I don't want to remember that it's a thing ever, so no. The first two are really interesting. Is the Star Trek one a reboot? I'm going to go with the box office amount. Like, I'm very curious right now. Because the opening weekend was 1.2 billion worldwide?
That's right.
Okay,
yeah.
cool. Hey, I remembered it.
So currently, including estimates for Friday, Avengers Endgame is sitting at $1.9 billion.
Holy cow.
So
What?
to put in perspective, this movie, there's 8 days of release information for this film. That means that in 8 days, it's made more money than every movie ever made, with the exception of course, Avatar, Titanic, The Force Awakens, and Infinity War.
How much money has Avatar made?
Internationally, $2.7 billion.
I think we might have a contender. Because that's throughout its whole life, right?
Correct, yeah. So the box office analysts that I pay attention to say that there is a chance, because, yeah, we have so much money at this point, but there's this sneaking suspicion that basically everyone who wanted to see Endgame saw it the opening weekend.
Right.
And in other words, there was more pressure than previous films to just go and see it opening weekend.
That's true. So it has a stronger early release, so the drop off will be even faster.
Yes.
That makes a ton of sense. Yeah.
And the other thing is that with both Avatar and The Force Awakens, those movies were released in December when there's typically less competition.
Right.
And so what that allowed those movies to do is basically have the whole month of January
Oh wow.
with no strong competition to basically be like the movie people went and saw at the box office.
Mhm.
So I've been tracking it day to day. They're doing a comparison with The Force Awakens because while Avatar has the international box office record, Force Awakens has the domestic box office record.
Oh, very nice. Okay.
So Force Awakens, when it came out 4 years ago now, it made over $900 million in North America alone.
Wow. Okay.
So coming out of the gate, opening weekend wise, yes, Endgame.
I keep doing the same thing. Yeah.
Endgame made like $100 million more than Force Awakens.
Right. So stronger opening because of like don't spoil the end game.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And throughout the week, they've been doing like a comparison, like basically after each day's box office, and the gap is slowly getting smaller.
Oh.
So by the 8th day of its release, Force Awakens had made $440 million.
Right.
And by the 8th day of Endgame's release, it's made $514.
Okay. So it's kind of shrinking because that impetus at the beginning is not as strong.
Well, I think it was also because fewer people went and saw Force Awakens the opening weekend, there were more people going each day of the week in the first week of release.
Yeah.
So this second weekend apparently will be very telling for how the film ends up performing. Like if it's actually going to be able to have the legs underneath it to defeat Avatar and Titanic.
We shall see.
I hope so. I'm just tired of living in a world where like the highest grossing film of all time is Avatar.
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment. It's a movie that you saw and then like you watch it a year later and you're really disenchanted with it. It's like, all right, this is.
And let me clarify, I've never actually watched Avatar.
It's not worth it. It's Pocahontas with blue people. Like it really is.
Well, apparently the huge reason people saw that in the theaters is because the 3D technology was so innovative.
Yeah, and it was beautiful to look at. Like they did a really good job of crafting a nice looking and pleasant world. But everything else about it, the story and all the other bits and pieces were just kind of like.
Now, should Endgame actually come out on top and defeat
I
Avatar?
will wipe it in the face of Avatar. We'll do it. Be like, ha.
Do you think this is basically what am I trying to say? Do you think Marvel could actually ever top Endgame at this point?
I don't think so. I think the first finale will be the biggest finale because everyone's been invested for the past 10 years, and I've known a lot of people who are like, all right, I'm getting burnt out on Marvel movies. So like, what do you mean? It's like, I've seen too many. So I think phase 4 of Marvel is going to be, it's going to have its Marvel fan following, but I don't think most people will have the same following that Endgame has had and that like Infinity Wars had. It's just, it's not going to be as strong. I think this is the strongest we're going to get for a while.
So that's sad to hear, but
Yeah.
I think it's correct. So your analytical skills are on point there.
Yeah.
But certainly by the end of this weekend, Endgame will have surpassed Infinity War and probably Force Awakens as well, because I'm looking at the math here. There's about a gap of... Oh, actually, I'm terrible at math. Anyway, point is there's a gap of less than $100 million between Endgame and Infinity War.
Okay.
And then the gap between Infinity War and Force Awakens is only like $20 million.
Oh, okay. Yeah, totally going to beat it.
So... I don't know. Again, maybe it's just my pride as a geek to like want
Star Wars to be beaten by Marvel.
Yeah, and then if Titanic and Avatar can get beaten too, because maybe that'll slow down James Cameron on making the 4 sequels he's talking about of Avatar.
We will find out next time on the Bat Jar. No, I'm kidding. We'll just revisit this every week.
Just checking in. Just as a note for anyone who hasn't seen the Sonic the Hedgehog trailer, it was so bad that the director actually came out on social media and said that they're going to try and redesign the character.
Yeah, like it's like we've heard you. Thank you for the support and thank you for the criticism. I was like, I don't think he said thank you for the criticism. There's probably a pitchfork mob holding him to his computer. But Sonic with human teeth, and the eyes are too small, and the coloring's off, and so they had the hashtag "Gotta Fix Fast," which is a joke on Sonic's classic tagline, "Gotta go fast." So, yep, that was. I'm happy. I'm really happy with the change that they're gonna try and do at least because hey, Jim Carrey looked like he was having a ton of fun in that movie, and I think somebody's post about this was my favorite. I hate Sonic now, but once it allows me to put it on the DVD player and entertain my children for 90 minutes, I will call Sonic the best movie of all time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, truly, this is an interesting world we live in because last week we were talking about one of the grandest superhero films ever made, one that has spoken to the world in a sense that it's made a ton of money and has drawn a lot of people's interest with Avengers Endgame. And so it's I found it hilarious that we ended up pulling 2003's Daredevil.
Was it one of the first
Well,
of like the 2000s superhero movies?
if by one of the first, yeah, like certainly with like the third or fourth.
Okay. Well,
But-
what were some before that? I can't.
Well, so Blade in 1998 was really the first modern comic book film.
Oh, really? Okay. Okay. Yes.
It came out 1 year after Batman and Robin kind of.
Yeah. Wait. Don't talk about that. Well, wait. Okay. So after Blade, I
And then
wasn't.
X-Men was in 2000.
There we go. Okay. That's
and
what I was trying to
then
figure out.
Spider-Man was in 2002.
Spider-Man was the big one. That was like.
Yeah, Spider-Man was the one that was a huge financial blockbuster success. It was probably the first of the Marvel movies anyway.
And who can forget that Nickelback? We need a hero to save us.
Technically Chad Kroeger, who's like the lead singer of Nickelback, is credited with that song featuring Josie Scott. It's not sung by Nickelback.
Oh, interesting.
So I don't know if that was done before that band formed or whatever, or there was some kind of licensing issue with the band, but it certainly sounds like a Nickelback song.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
And I love that song. Just
Yeah, no,
let
it's
the record show.
It was really, really good. Like when it first came out, I think I had that on my MP3 player, my AAA battery powered MP3 player.
So this film is infamous, and we're going to get into that. But before that, we always got to go back to the beginning, talk about the character. So Daredevil, aka Matt Murdock, was
That double alliteration name, classic.
which was a thing because Stan Lee had a hard time remembering all the characters. So if he gave them all double initial names, it made him easier to remember.
Peter Parker, Matt Murdock, Bruce Banner,
Reed Richards,
yeah, get it all down.
Sue Storm.
Yeah. Really? Oh man, ouch.
So Daredevil was created by Stan Lee and artist Bill Everett. And there's a note here that says, with an unspecified amount of input from Jack Kirby.
Hey, make his eyes bigger. Jack, I'm trying to work here.
Well, I think, so Daredevil's first appearance was in Daredevil #1 in April 1964.
Wow.
So by that point, they had introduced a lot of their Marvel characters already. And I think it was at the point where Jack Kirby was already drawing so many of the Marvel comics that he couldn't actually keep up. And I think it was also the point where Stan Lee was writing so much that he'd come up with the ideas and get other people to actually write out the scripts. So I feel like this is a case where probably Jack Kirby drew a picture of Daredevil. Was like, here's what Daredevil looks like. Bill Everett, go.
Go.
So he's been a part of Marvel Comics since he came out during the heyday of the Marvel characters, like that 1960, 1968 era when
just everything was being made.
Yeah.
Put a name of a thing, and then put a name of a dude, and just mash them together till you have characters.
Yeah, Stan Lee has cited his inspiration for creating Daredevil as just to create a character with a disability. And for those who have never heard of Daredevil, part of his character is that he is blind.
Yeah.
And his superhuman powers allow him to see,
Right,
air
yeah.
quotes see.
Well, it's like echolocation kind of thing.
Yes, he truly should be Batman.
Yeah, he should be Batman, and then Batman should just be rich. Rich man.
There's a funny little video on YouTube where they basically have Daredevil, Batman, and Ghost Rider all in the same shot.
Okay.
And Ghost Rider's like, I should be Daredevil because I'm a stuntman, I have a motorcycle. And Daredevil's like, I should be Batman because I use echolocation like a bat. and Batman's just like, but I want to be Batman. So I think it was a smart move to for the sake of actually representing other groups of people to.
Yeah.
And I guess Stan was actually like concerned. He's like, are blind people going to be offended by this character? Like, here, I'm taking a blind guy, but then having him not only be able to like air quotes see, but do things that normal people can't do.
Yeah. But I think the response from it was really good. Like, he's still a character, and still, like, the Netflix series came back even after the 2003 movie was a bit of a flop. So it's definitely a beloved character.
Yeah, and I guess they got a lot of letters and feedback from like the children's school for the blind and whatnot afterwards, saying thank you so much for doing this. So
Now, did they release editions in Braille?
I don't know.
Ah,
That would make sense.
yeah. I'm gonna slowly search that while you bring up the next bit.
Well, I was going to ask how we were first introduced to the character.
Oh my goodness. He was one of the Catholic comic book characters, so he came up in discussions every now and then when I was growing up. But the 2003 movie, once again, was the first time I ran into him.
But you said you hadn't seen it up until yesterday.
I hadn't, but that's how I heard about him. Like, it was advertised,
Oh.
so I knew the idea of who he was. You know, you got to see the suit on the TV, and
And would it have not have been until the Netflix series that you actually spent any time with the character?
correct.
We can't seem to handle one man in a mask. I could understand if he had an iron suit or a magic hammer, maybe.
Justice is a matter of asking the right people the right questions in the right tone of voice. Then forgive me for being blunt.
This man in the mask. Take care of him.
Your outfit kind of sucks, by the way.
Yeah, it's a work in progress.
So that was really the first like grand introduction. I really enjoyed the actor that they picked for it. My brother enjoyed it so much that he cosplayed as Netflix's Daredevil's first black suit for Comic-Con, which was really, really cool.
Well, I think the 2003 film was my first introduction to Daredevil as well.
Really?
Work to do.
And it was a happy coincidence that just as all these movies were coming out based on Marvel Comics characters, that I was getting into comic books for the first time. So I remember around that time reading like Spider-Man comic books that Daredevil would pop in and be like a guest star of.
Oh, okay, interesting.
But-
right, because they're in the same city.
They're in the at that point still most Marvel characters were in New York.
It's just a hotbed of a hot breeding ground of superheroes.
Well,
apparently.
Stan Lee said he liked to write about what he knew, and he knew New York because he was from New York.
That's
so.
fair. Yeah.
But yeah, if I can remember things properly, I do remember the movie being my first like full-on introduction to the character and the story. And then shortly after, there was a VHS that was released, Spider-Man versus Daredevil.
Oh, whoa. Okay.
I find this hilarious in hindsight, but basically at the time, Disney owned the rights to the 90s Marvel cartoons.
Right.
So this was before Disney actually bought Marvel.
Right.
But they did own the rights to these 90s TV shows. So what they did is that every time a new movie was coming out based on a Marvel Comics character, they would release a video cassette of episodes featuring those characters. So for all the Spider-Man movies, they had the rights to the 90s Spider-Man show, so they would just release, this one has Doc Ock in it? Okay, here's a bunch of Spider-Man things with Doc Ock. And when Daredevil came out, they basically released a video cassette that had all of the episodes of the 90s Spider-Man show that had Daredevil in them.
That's so weird. So they just like picked it out and they're like, here you go, more Daredevil.
Yeah, and so like when X-Men 2 came out and was so focused on Wolverine, they put out a X-Men video cassette that had a bunch of episodes from the X-Men series that were focused on Wolverine.
You can see the infrared spectrum? No, I can smell it. infamous line of like the first 3 episodes of the X-Men 90s cartoon.
Oh, okay. but it was that was like my second introduction to the character, was seeing him in the context of the 90s Spider-Man show, because I didn't watch that show as it aired, but I basically like over time saw more and more of the show as it was released on VHS.
Right.
And so it was interesting to see like the more PG-13 version of Daredevil from the film juxtaposed against the kid-friendly version that got into the Spider-Man show.
Right. Which was a very interesting, like, I barely remember those episodes. I remember a lot more, like, obviously the Green Goblin stuff, but I remember, like, Venom and Rhino and Scorpion. But he popped in every now and then. The Magnificent Seven. No, not Magnificent Seven. The Fantastic Four? No. The Five.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
There you go. Those.
Well, pretty much every Marvel character appeared in at least one episode of the 90s Spider-Man show.
Yeah, it was. Why was that? Just like they didn't have any other platform, and that was kind of just
I think so. I think it was like they just had the writers wanted to be ambitious and wanted to make it seem like Marvel Comics.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of other Spider-Man shows where he seemingly is the only superhero that exists, in that show, he's part of the Marvel Universe. So
it's pretty cool. Kingpin was also awesome in the 90s Spider-Man.
Who was voiced by a black man.
Really? Oh, that's awesome.
Which is interesting based on the conversation we're about to have. So we'll just talk about the movie now, Daredevil 2003.
Yep.
I don't think there's a need to put a spoiler warning on this because this movie's 16 years old at this point.
And it's just terrifying. It is terrifying.
So if you haven't seen the 2003 Daredevil movie, we're going to talk about it with spoilers, so just get ready for that.
Yep.
What I find very interesting with this film is like the journey it took to getting made.
Oh, interesting. Okay, tell me about that.
Well, we did a whole episode on our podcast once explaining that Marvel Comics was going bankrupt in the 90s.
Yeah.
And one of the things they did to try and salvage themselves was selling off movie rights to different studios, because at that point they didn't think they'd ever be in the business of making movies about their characters.
Right.
So in 1997, 20th Century Fox bought the rights from Marvel, and they picked Chris Columbus, the director of Home Alone and later Harry Potter movies, to direct the film. However, I guess 20th Century Fox kind of sat on it too long.
Mm-hmm.
So Disney began negotiations. Ironically, Disney, of all people, began negotiating for the rights.
We knew it was going to be here all along.
But then those negotiations fell through in 1999, and Columbia Pictures, a.k.a. Sony,
Right.
who at the time were developing a Spider-Man movie, got the rights, and
after their success of Spider-Man, decided.
Well, they were in the process of like making Spider-Man. They hadn't made it yet.
Mm-hmm.
But a year later in 2000, Sony, for whatever reason, decided to cancel the project because, and I don't understand this, it says, as the two companies reportedly could not come to an agreement over internet rights.
Okay, that's super weird.
The early 2000s, I guess, web URLs or whatever was important.
You have our URLs and we have yours, and nowadays no one cares.
So New Regency, a different studio, basically entered negotiations and somehow attained the rights from Marvel in 2000 to produce the movie, and then 20th Century Fox got involved as the distributor of the movie.
Okay.
So if everyone understands the process there, it started with Fox, and then it went to Sony, almost by Disney, and then it went to New Regency, and then Fox came back as a distributor.
Yep. Man. Wow. And that's just for Daredevil.
And the writer-director of the film, Mark Steven Johnston, who later went on to do the first Ghost Rider movie.
Oh dear. Okay. Yep. So I'm seeing a pattern here.
He was hired at Sony to make the movie, but then when Sony canceled the project, New Regency basically rehired him and offered him the job of writer-director for the movie. So he worked on the movie for two different studios.
And his ideas were consistent. Zoom in on everything. Even the Ghost Rider movie had that problem. Oh, man.
So this is an interesting film because it comes from that time in Marvel Enterprises was basically like the sole production arm of Marvel Comics.
Right.
So they were basically the film licensor that dealt with all the movie studios. So you didn't have Fox Marvel or Sony Marvel or Marvel Studios as we know today.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, we don't have Fox Marvel anymore.
Which is super weird because you thought they were always going to be a thing. They're just like the arm of Marvel that is Fox. Like, just at least some ideas.
Just goes to show you never know what'll happen.
Oh.
But anyway, this movie came out in a time when basically all the different people who were involved in producing films for Marvel were kind of working together.
Mm-hmm.
And I only really realized this when we were watching the credits show up at the beginning of the movie. One of the producers of the movie, the executive producers, his name is Avi Arad.
Mm-hmm.
He was very involved in getting Marvel Studios started, and after this movie came out. But before that, he was very much involved in the licensing of the different TV shows and basically getting Marvel comics outside of the comics.
Mm-hmm.
So he was a producer on all the movies that were being done based on Marvel Comics characters, and he essentially ended up kind of finding himself over at Sony. He kind of left Marvel Studios and became like the Marvel producer for Sony.
That's so weird. But at least he had the right background. Like, they didn't just hire a random person.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't like him.
Had the right background.
Like, it's because of him the Venom movie was made.
I still haven't seen it. No spoilers.
And it's because of him that Venom got shoehorned in Spider-Man 3.
Okay, yeah. That's... What Spider-Man 3? What?
Remember that from like
No. There was Spider-Man 1, Spider-Man 2. And then they restarted it with...
Amazing Spider-Man?
Yeah. And then there's this Amazing Spider-Man 2. It's always 2. And now there's Homecoming 2. And then after that, we won't have a third Spider-Man movie. There's no 3 Spider-Man movies.
Oh, interesting. No, so Avi Arad, who was a producer on this Daredevil movie, went on to be the Sony Marvel guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have Kevin Feige, who is the current president of Marvel Studios and the sole producer of every MCU movie.
And is that Happy from...
No, that's a different guy.
Okay.
But Kevin Feige was a co-producer on this Daredevil movie,
Mm-hmm.
and he was a co-producer on that Spider-Man movie that you don't want to talk about.
Yep.
And then you have people who would later become part of Sony, Marvel, and MCU, also involved in the making of this Daredevil movie. So it's truly a time capsule because these kind of movies aren't made anymore. There's these like the movie rights to Marvel characters have been sparsed out in such a way that you would not see a joint effort like this happen now.
Mm-hmm.
It's since the Disney Fox merger, it's not as much of a thing.
Yeah.
But still exists. Sony has a death grip on all the Spider-Man characters.
And of course they would. I hope they bring him back a little bit. So how did we get Spider-Man recently?
They basically Sony and Marvel came to an unwritten agreement to they negotiated sharing custody, if you will.
Yep.
For
the child.
for 5 movies.
Nice.
And Far From Home will be the last one. So I'm really worried about what happens next.
Oh my gosh.
But anyway, we're talking about Daredevil.
Yep, let's do it.
So this movie, when it came out, it had the opening weekend for whatever it was competing against, but it had like the second highest opening for February at the time, which shows that it wasn't such a huge success. It got fairly mixed reviews from critics.
I wonder why.
Some people praised the performances, but they criticized other elements of the movie.
Just some of the random narrative elements thrown in, which we will discuss later.
Now, this is my big take from seeing Daredevil as a kid. I remember going to the theater, and I remember sitting down, excited to see a new movie based on a Marvel superhero.
Yeah.
And during the trailers, they showed a trailer for X-Men 2.
Right.
And a trailer for Hulk.
Okay.
Like the 2003 Hulk.
Yeah.
Let's not talk about that movie.
No.
But all to say, it was like the first time in my life where I was like, wow, like there's more than one superhero movie coming out this year.
Yeah, after X-Men, things really kind of took off. I think Spider-Man was a big one for me. X-Men, yes, kind of, but X-Men always felt like a different universe. I'm not sure why. They just, it wasn't superpowers, it was mutations, and there was all these mutations, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I was excited to see superheroes. And Spider-Man was a really amazing movie that everyone went to see. So we were all discussing Spider-Man. It was pretty neat.
So it's just kind of funny to think back in my childhood brain thinking wow, we get more than one superhero movie a year. And now, of course, it's ironic because there's 10, 12 that come out every year.
Yeah, you're just okay, which superhero do I care about more? I can skip the superhero movie, I guess.
You don't skip superhero movies.
I would have skipped the Hulk had I known.
Oh. So you never actually watched the movie when it came out?
Nope. I think my parents quoted it I was too young. There's some inappropriate content. And I was all right, cool. I just didn't care. I was more excited about Spider-Man and the upcoming Hulk movie.
Oh. How naive.
Yeah, I know. If only I could tell myself the things I knew now.
Well, I remember seeing the movie and enjoying it, and it certainly was PG-13 gritty, so it was as gritty as you could get with PG-13. So you saw blood and you saw people get stabbed. And,
Yeah.
And at that point, I think I would have been like 12 years old. I'd been like,
Yeah,
this is so cool.
People getting stabbed. I remember we always used to watch those like Chinese kung fu movies, and that was intense because there was all this like punching and stabbing and.
So I can't help but wonder, like, you saw for the first time yesterday.
As a boy, an accident took his sight, but gave him superhuman senses.
Police suspect Daredevil was the one to bring the criminals to justice.
I don't know why you read that trash.
Now, one hero.
I got work to do.
The Kingpin. He runs the whole town.
Give me bullseye.
Will do what no one else will dare. Daredevil.
I'll get some air.
Rated PG-13. February 14th.
It truly is a product of its time. Like
It really is. Like, it just reminded me of everything, the good and the bad, from like the early 2000s. It actually reminded me of the Sonic movie that's up and coming.
Oh, this is just getting sadder and sadder as we go along. It was in that time period where comic book films were being made, but the writers and producers and directors and
We're
even
kind of making them like every other movie-ish. Like, they're making them like action films.
Yeah, and there was like this fear to like fully embrace all of the elements of the comic books.
Mm-hmm. I think there was a really cool article once that in the most recent Shazam, there's a little bug with a little translator on it. And he's a character. This little weird caterpillar dude's a character. And they're like, if this movie was made in the early 2000s, he would have been someone called the Bug and would have had like a little caterpillar pin maybe on his suit or something. Like, that's a thing.
I'm pretty sure I said that on our podcast.
Oh, really?
So someone's stealing my ideas.
Oh,
we gotta go track this person down and.
There you go. I'm just quoting you. That's how forgetful I am. But yeah, like 100%.
Like, there's a character in this film called Bullseye. Okay.
Oh gosh, yep.
And
Colin Firth as an insane man.
Colin Farrell.
Colin Farrell. There you go.
Different Colin.
Yeah, it's too many Collins. Change your name. Colin the second.
In the comic books, Daredevil and Bullseye have a rivalry. They're, basically, I don't want to say they're arch enemies because they're not, but Bullseye is a character who has a costume that is very super villainy. It's mostly black with like white gloves, and then he has like a white target on his forehead.
Right.
And they choose to represent that in the movie by
this weird skin modification, like carving of a bullseye on the skin of his forehead, and it looks so gross. It looks like someone took like a flesh-colored bandage and just applied it to his forehead and carved out a symbol.
Yeah, it's very bizarre because it's like you're comfortable having, Daredevil in his comic book accurate costume, so why stop at Bullseye? What is it?
Yeah, it could, like, a tattoo would have been fine. A tattoo would have been more than fine.
No, I want a full-on Bullseye costume. And then this is what I mean is that this movie was made at a time when people were basically afraid to go full comic book. Like, they dialed back on elements that they thought people wouldn't take seriously or wouldn't appreciate. So that's just kind of like one example. They completely got the Bullseye character wrong anyway. The way that he's portrayed in the Netflix series, and you haven't seen it because it's in season 3, but the way that they portray that character in season 3 is much more not only just comics accurate in terms of the character, but it's just more interesting as well. But certainly it has that kind of gritty look that a lot of those early 2000s movies had. Not just comic book films of the time, but just movies in general.
Just movies in general, like dark lighting, really weird coloring. Yeah.
You can tell this came out after The Matrix because, oh boy, there is slow motion.
Yeah, everywhere. They're just like, all right, we're going to slow-mo this. We're going to slow-mo this other section. We're going to show some like backflips and stuff. People love backflips.
The computer effects, the CGI, are really bad in parts.
Pretty impressive for some areas, though. Like, other than not getting human movement right at all, it literally looks like a marionette being dragged along into certain areas. But yeah, no, like it. They had some really good bits, and then they just had some terrible CGI.
Yeah, like a lot of movies at the time, the film opens with like this like CGI recreation of an environment where you kind of like the camera flies you through and see all the different titles or whatever, and you're like, this is what they were doing at that time. It's just Okay.
Well, we didn't even get to fly through like a sci-fi blueprint and see all the title sequence. That would have been cool. This one was just a city. It was so boring.
And like a lot of super movies from that time, it's like once the person gets their powers, you get like this weird like zooming into their body to like see like how
The cells are changing.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
like,
That happened
okay.
with Hulk. Happened with Spider-Man. Happened with like I think one section of X-Men. Like,
yeah, it's like all the title sequences of X-Men are always like going through the DNA sequences of characters.
Oh man, they love those DNA sequences.
It's all about the science.
Science, the science of superheroes.
So it's hilarious for me now to like talk about this movie because we have the Netflix series to contrast it with.
Mm-hmm. Which is just a far more human approach. Like it's not like Daredevil the movie feels very much like a comic book. Like this is happening. These are my powers. There are bad guys now, and we're going for it. Whereas like Daredevil the series is a much more natural progression of like okay, like I'm starting to discover things. These are the people in my life. Like it's a much more human approach.
Well, and this movie has one of those tropes wherein it shows you basically like near the end of the movie first, and then it treats the rest of the movie as if it's a giant flashback.
Right. Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And I feel like that was another thing a lot of movies at that time did, just to do non-linear storytelling. To like, okay, like here's we're gonna drop you into action, and then we're gonna take you all the way back to when they were a kid, and then we're gonna flash forward to the present, and then lead you up to the events that we got to here.
I think the movie that did that best, without just ruining the trope completely, was Megamind. Like it was a movie that came out years after that trope, and they're just like, so how did I get here? Ah yes, here I am, falling to my death. It wasn't always this way.
Did the inclusion of that storytelling device, did it help you get more interested in his character?
Literally did nothing for me. I was just like, all right, cool, let's get to the story.
Would you rather have just had been introduced like to him as a child first and just gone through it sequentially?
Would have been fine. Would have not changed the movie at all.
Because again, this was a time when superhero movies weren't as prevalent as they are now.
Mm-hmm.
So doing an origin story might have already been at that point like too cliche to like, okay, let's just start with him as a kid, and then because you can't help but feel like vibes of Batman.
Yeah.
When you see Daredevil's story played out. Obviously, there's many differences. Bruce Wayne was rich and Matt was not, but still, I don't know. It just.
All the bits and pieces are just.
Speaking of Batman, Ben Affleck plays Daredevil in this movie.
Yeah.
And apparently he signed on to play Daredevil because he thought it was the closest he'd ever get to being able to play Batman.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh man.
Because he was a huge fan of Batman, and I guess he never thought he could do it, which of course in hindsight is hilarious.
We now know.
I don't think he's terrible in the role.
No, he does a pretty decent job of being a blind guy. Like
he kind of has his mouth open a lot.
I don't really know what that was all about.
It's just like,
yeah, it's like that's not no.
And even the way they chose to like kind of cloud out his eyes, like I know a couple blind people and
they don't have clouded eyes. Their eyes look normal. They just can't see, right?
Yeah, but I guess in his case because he was hit by chemicals, maybe
that
that's
makes
why
a lot
it's
more
like
sense.
that.
Yeah, and he's got the scarring around the eyes and stuff.
Yeah, but like again, if I compare him to Charlie Cox, who plays him on the TV show, like when I see him play Daredevil, I swear he's actually blind.
Right.
Just in his, and I don't know, Ben Affleck, like he did the best he could, but it just wasn't
There's
convincing.
moments where he just, he's not blind. He just does certain things, and you're like, oh, okay, like.
And that's one of my big complaints about this movie is that, yes, Daredevil / Matt Murdock is this blind person who also has these superpowers, which means he's able to be a superhero. But in his civilian life, nobody knows about his powers. So in most of the comics I've read, in the Netflix show, he acts like a blind dude.
Yeah.
In this movie, he
blatantly ignores that.
Yeah, he basically like does all this stuff that is very impressive for a normal person, and you just can't help but think, are you trying to like hide the fact that you have superpowers or not?
Yeah, like at one point, his coworker is like shooting baskets. He misses, and he was like swish. But Matt, of course, who can hear and see everything, knows that he misses. Grabs the baseball that he throws at him like 2 minutes later in the scene, and just throws it from across the room for a perfect swish. And if you do that regularly enough, come on.
One of the most criticized scenes in this film is
it's so jarring.
The playground fight scene between Matt Murdock and Elektra.
So he sees this pretty girl. They're in a coffee shop. You're
Where
like,
he
okay,
smells her.
yeah, gosh, and everything's normal. And then she leaves after a brief, very awkward conversation, and he follows her out. And instantly, they start fighting in a playground. And it's like, all right, we both know kung fu apparently.
And again, it's like who would if I saw that Matt Murdock doing that kind of stuff, I would not believe he was blind. I'd
No.
be like, there's either you're faking it, you're wearing color contacts, or you have superpowers and you're someone else. Not a very good job keeping your secret identity there.
Sorry, Matt.
And in this film, there's a reporter who is also in the Netflix series, Ben Urich, who is trying to figure out who Daredevil is. You're not helping your case by not only kind of being super in real life, but your cane, your blind man cane, is also your Daredevil staff.
And your weapon, yeah. Like, you need to compartmentalize a little bit more, Matt. Sorry, bud.
But you were impressed with the fact he slept in water.
Yeah, so it was super, super neat. Like in 2003 Daredevil, they really pushed the heightened senses a lot more than in the TV series. So like he could hear for blocks and blocks away, and so he built himself this really cool, like I almost felt like a vampire coffin, like sensory deprivation tank. So you float in it, everything is blocked out. Although I was thinking his room should have sound dampening around it, like those quiet rooms. Nowadays, if they built it, that would be it. I was really impressed. But I was like, oh yeah, of course. He tries to get a good night's sleep by not hearing the thousands of people that he needs to help. Like, I don't know how Superman sleeps. He just doesn't.
I don't think he needs sleep as a Kryptonian.
Maybe. Man,
But
the race is overpowered.
Kingpin is in this movie. So this is a character who was initially introduced in the comics as a Spider-Man villain, but then in the 80s was kind of brought into the world of Daredevil as the main villain of the Daredevil series, and so now he's
Oh, I didn't know that.
yeah, so now he's kind of a villain for both, but he's more since Daredevil doesn't have nearly as many quality villains, he's kind of more associated with Daredevil than Spider-Man.
Makes sense.
And it's always an opportunity for Spider-Man and Daredevil to team up when Kingpin's involved.
Yeah.
So in this film, they chose to do some race bending, and they cast Michael Clark Duncan.
Which was a really good casting idea. I find he didn't have enough presence in terms of like being the gangster running everything. He just kind of showed up. Like he wasn't. He looks too pleasant for the role. Like he just looks so like a big bear.
Well, he certainly, to me anyway, when I watched it, seemed imposing because he's this big, massive man with these huge, muscly arms.
No, he's very kind face.
He's in a lot less of the movie than I remembered.
Really? Like you thought he was more prevalent?
Yeah, or at least I would have thought for him being like considered the big bad or being the ultimate enemy of Daredevil, he doesn't actually have all that much screen time. He doesn't do very much. Like he's in his office for a couple scenes, he's at that party for one scene, and then he's in his office at the end.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So
yeah,
the fun Easter egg with his performance is that in the 2003 Spider-Man animated series, where Neil Patrick Harris played Spider-Man,
okay,
they actually had Michael Clark Duncan reprise his role as Daredevil, or as the Kingpin.
Oh,
in an
really?
episode.
Oh.
So they had Kingpin in an episode of the Spider-Man show, which was produced in Vancouver. Shout out to Canada.
Was it animated or was it? Okay, cool.
Yeah. So they not only did they model the character after him, but then he voiced it as well.
That's super cool. Okay, I'd love to see a clip of that.
So if you think who do you think would win the fight? Michael Clark Duncan Kingpin or Vincent D'Onofrio Kingpin?
Oh man. Michael Clark Duncan would probably win. Like Vincent D'Onofrio is imposing, but Michael Clark is just he's built as a linebacker. Like, let's be honest here, he's huge.
And of course, Michael Clark Duncan tragically passed away a few years ago. So
yeah.
Rest in peace.
Lost a pretty good actor. Like, yeah, he's a good guy.
This movie has a director's cut, which is radically different from the theatrical cut, and
I don't even know.
That's the version we watched yesterday. You happy accident put on the director's cut of the movie,
and I was able to learn the differences from Average Joe, which was really nice.
Yeah, so the director's cut of the movie is about 30 minutes longer than the theatrical cut.
I should have gone for the theatrical cut.
Well, no, because it's interesting. Like the I don't know why like usually a director's cut is made because there was a disagreement between the director and the studio about how to make the movie.
Right.
So this director's cut it's classified as R-rated.
Okay.
Aside from a couple curse words, I didn't really
Notice the difference.
the need for it to be R-rated.
The need for speed.
I guess a couple of Bullseye's kills are a little more graphic, but I don't know. I'm asking you because you haven't seen the.
Yeah, no, I have no clue. Like I can imagine. Like I was like, okay, yeah, those bloody ones is probably the one you're talking about and stuff like that. But
the biggest change that the director's cut does to the movie is it adds in a subplot where Matt Murdock and Foggy Nelson are actually being lawyers,
which is great. Like that's what they should have been doing.
Well, that's the thing. So, like in the theatrical cut, the only time you ever see them actually doing any lawyer work is that first scene with Jose Quesada.
Oh, okay. So the rest of the movie, no lawyering.
Yeah, I realized when we were watching it last night that basically Jon Favreau, who plays Foggy Nelson in this movie, who went on to be Happy Hogan in the director of the first two Iron Man movies,
and a recurring like agent character in some of the movies as well.
Yeah, he actually has a lot more screen time in the director's cut because there's so many scenes from the director's cut that involve Foggy.
Right.
And so I can't imagine what Jon Favreau must have felt to like have filmed all those scenes and then find out that they weren't in the movie.
That's kind of weird, but the director's cut definitely feels more holistic in terms of who Daredevil is than what you're telling me the theatrical version is.
Yeah, because the theatrical cut is more focused on his relationship with Elektra.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the big differences is that in the theatrical cut, there's a scene where they're on a rooftop and it's raining, and he hears people in danger, and she's like, "No, stay with me." In the theatrical cut, he stays with her, and they have a PG-13 sex scene.
That's amazing. What? Oh man!
In the director's cut, he just leaves her there and goes off and does his daredeviling.
That's so weird. Which I think the theatrical cut makes more sense of the last fight. Her reaction to the last fight when she unmasks him. Spoiler alert. There's like 5 people who unmask him in this movie, as you mentioned. It's like, yeah, it was like, what was it? What was one of the Spider-Man movies? I was like, all right, is everyone gonna learn your identity? Like, geez, Louise.
Yeah.
But
if you think about it, it's like there are a couple moments like this where like something drastically different happens, and so you can imagine how it changes the narrative. In the theatrical cut, after he kills Jose Quesada, he goes to confession. You see it. That's like the one scene with the priest in the theatrical cut is he goes to confession afterwards.
That's so weird.
And he's basically confessing murder, and the priest is like, "Oh, I'm not a fan of the outfit." So like the priest, it's implied in the theatrical cut that the priest knows about him being Daredevil.
Interesting. Okay.
But in the director's cut, he kind of goes to the church a couple times, and just kind of like says, "Oh, I enjoy it here for the quiet," and then just sort of kind of walks in and out. So
and he never goes to confession.
And he never goes to confession for having murdered that guy.
Yeah, they should have put that scene of him in the confessional at the end.
Oh, yeah, they should have.
Would have been good.
But I feel like that also addresses the question of like how does the priest know him? Because in the opening scene of the movie, he like falls in the church and the priest is there.
Yeah, it's like oh no.
But yeah, the Netflix series certainly does a lot better job at like addressing his Catholic faith. Because unlike Hellboy, who is just kind of Catholic in name, like the fact that his math is Catholic does play into his character a lot.
Yeah.
Especially with like his sense of responsibility and guilt and
his moral like choices. Like he sometimes has like spiritual direction, which you never see in a TV series. He's like usually it's in the confessional, but he's discussing like, Father, like I have certain responsibilities and I have the power to change things. I don't know what to do anymore. And it was just like super, super cool moral quandaries.
Yeah, so that was another element of the movie that really fit in with the era was just the editing, like the kind of obnoxious ways the camera zoomed in on people
and all the fights. Like it's so hard to follow. Like I didn't realize it, but like as a kid, I used to get lost in fight sequences sometimes, and I was just like, maybe I'm just not good enough to follow these things. But nowadays, you just realize it's bad directing. Like it's like the Transformers movie. They just zoom in on everything so much that you can't tell what's going on.
Well, I think part of why they do that and why they film so much at night is so that they can get away without showing you more.
Right, yeah.
So and especially with fight scenes, like the closer edits you can do, that means the less you have to show the actor's face. So it means you can just have stunt people.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
Which, for the scenes where there's actually human beings involved, like the fight scenes are I would say fairly impressive.
Yeah. standard fare, but some of the like stunts that they pull are just beyond ridiculous. Like some of like the movements of the body are just like a little bit silly. But I think the most ridiculous one is Bullseye at one point runs out of things to throw at Daredevil, so he jumps through a stained glass window and then proceeds to, in a frantic like scream, catch 30 pieces of stained glass as they fall and just toss them all at him, and it was just beyond ridiculous for me.
Yeah, they never explicitly say in this if Bullseye has superpowers, but he must, because he literally at one point takes one of his billy clubs and like pushes it like 30 feet with enough force to impale a guy.
Yeah, like it's just like he can throw things from like miles and miles away. And at one point, like he misses Daredevil. It's like, I never miss. It's like, well, if you never miss and that's your like lifestyle, he's got to have some kind of weird superpower.
Yeah, it's one thing to just be a really good marksman, but to have that kind of strength,
it's just
it's
ridiculous.
But I remember what I'd forgotten. Daredevil's ethics. He's a lawyer, okay, so and he's all about only defending the innocent. So
Right.
I don't understand law enough. I understand that there's cases that can be made to basically a way to protect or defend people who are guilty and get them off or whatever. But
Right.
his whole thing is like we have to defend the innocent and yada yada. And when people kind of cheat the justice system, his response is, "Well, I'm just going to kill you." And he says he's seeking justice, but is that truly justice?
Mm-hmm. Well, in a way, it's objective justice, but that's not how justice works. Like, if we were pretty sure that this like big gangster was behind all these crimes, you can't just kill him, because that would be like what bedlam? Is that a proper word for this? It would just be like madness.
So you think he's flawed in thinking that he's serving justice by essentially killing the criminals he can't.
Well,
get,
yeah,
he
but
can't
like
get in
he's a
court.
vigilante, and all vigilantes do that. But he's also a lawyer, and so he knows better. And he's also Catholic, so he knows, like, like it's not his place. But
Well, it seems kind of hypocritical in a sense.
it really is.
It's like, okay, you anyway. It'd be Anyway.
Final thoughts.
So okay, Elektra. Her character's meant to be Greek. To me, Jennifer Garner does not look Greek at all.
She's very, very much not Greek.
And the only thing I can say positive about her in this movie is that they recreate one of the iconic scenes from the comics where Bullseye kills Elektra, stabbing her with
so
a
the
sai.
best part of the movie is where she died.
Yeah. And she should have stayed dead because they made a really bad spin-off movie called Elektra that is just, it's awful. They auctioned off the bustier she wore in Elektra, and that made more money than the movie.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
Yeah.
Ouch.
And maybe it's because we watched the director's cut, but I didn't get a sense from their interactions that they really loved each other. And Matt Murdock at the end of the movie says to Kingpin, like, you took away the two people I've only ever, the two people I've loved.
The only two people.
Thank you.
The only two people I've ever loved.
And I was like, really? Like, what was it about her you loved so much? Like,
You fought a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, you fought a few other people. You got to marry Bullseye. Gonna marry Bullseye, Daredevil. You fought him.
Yeah, and maybe it's because the director's cut has the whole subplot in there with the lawyer stuff that doesn't include as much time for Elektra. But I just didn't buy the fact that they were in love with each other.
No, 100%. And it was just one of those. I think it's because of the cut. If you had that scene, the rain scene in there, it might have been a little bit different. But most movies rush romances anyways. So yeah.
That's fair. But I mean, one thing the TV show gets right about Elektra is that she is someone from his past, like someone he met during law school. And so when she shows up in modern day and is a trained assassin and whatever, there's actually something to go off of in terms of the history of their relationship.
Oh, super cool.
But the way it's framed here in the movie, it's like they're meeting for the first time. And so like you're trying to build upon the tragic romance and the history of their relationship.
Instead of someone you've met before and has kind of come back into your life. Like, it's not a Mary Jane.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
So for me, the romance doesn't work. And it's kind of ironic because Ben Affleck and Jennifer Garner actually like ended up being romantically involved with each other as a result of this movie.
Oh,
and so that it ended up being the end of his marriage to Jennifer Lopez.
Mm-hmm.
And then they got married, and then they had kids, and I think they're divorced now. So
Guys, we're almost done, guys.
that's like Hollywood weddings for you or Hollywood marriages for you. Anyway, I'm just running out of steam here talking about this.
Yeah,
I liked it as a kid.
Yeah, but it has not aged well. The CGI is not aged. So, like, I was thinking of Lord of the Rings while I was watching it. I was like, came out nearly the same time, but because they focused on physical props, it's going to age way better. And yeah, no, my final thoughts, I give it 1.5 out of 4 bad cookies.
Wow, that is rough.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll be a little more generous. I gave the R-rated Hellboy movie 2 out of 4 bad cookies.
Oh, okay, wow. All right.
So I enjoyed this more than that. So I'll give it 2.2 out of 4 bad cookies.
Interesting. All right, yeah, no.
And I think I would be more generous towards it if I didn't have the Netflix series to compare it against.
That makes sense. Yeah, if there was the only Daredevil, it's like, well, it's what we got. But yeah, they made it better. Sweet. So what do we got?
Let's go into the bat jar and look at our mail.
Alrighty. All right.
So it's pretty much just the bottom.
The bottom of it. How are comics educational or not to kids and teens nowadays? That's really interesting. Okay, so I'm gonna go based on like the 2 comics that I've read. I've read so few comics that it is actually really interesting. So one of them was the Bravest Warriors comics, which was not educational at all. So I can't really speak to that one. But there have been a few. Let's see here, and I've picked up Gwenpool as well. And that was the other comic that I was interested in reading and picked up. I find that it helps you learn about the comic book universe, and there's some comics that originally, back in the 90s, were really focused on character flaws and how enemies were consumed by their my goodness, what's the word? Their flaws. Enemies were consumed by their flaws.
I'm trying to think. I've never really thought about comic books as an educational tool. Certainly, there are stories that are told in comics that are about social conflict or race relations or politics that are.
X-Men was a big one for that.
Yeah, so like even talking about discrimination in general. So and in the same way that a lot of science fiction will talk about like racism through the allegory of the alien, a lot of these stories involve characters that are dealing with some kind of discrimination of a sort.
So there's a lot of it depends on the comic, but there's always an underlying philosophy in each comic book. And if you find the ones with good underlying philosophy, start reading those because you'll usually get, at least some moral education out of it.
Yeah, but if I'm being totally honest, like most of the comic books written in like the 40s, 50s, 60s, and even I would say up until the 80s and 90s, the people writing them weren't thinking with like a moral philosophy in mind. They're
making comics.
It's formed by their own philosophy. So whatever influences they had in their lives up until the point they wrote that story are underpinning it, but they didn't intentionally put that perspective in there to like communicate that message. They were just motivated by what they think a hero is, basically.
Yeah.
I think as an education tool, it can certainly teach kids how to read, and it can teach them how to put together the images and to kind of like the spin out the narrative for themselves. Mm-hmm. There are comic books made nowadays for kids because the reality is that like mainstream Marvel and DC comic books, the stories are written with a level of maturity, not just in like the violence and the promiscuity of the costumes and whatever else, but just the complexity of the storytelling is such that the main audience is adults.
Yeah, and then kids wouldn't be able to keep up. But nowadays you've got a lot of I'm thinking graphic novels, online comics that are much more geared towards like younger audiences.
And there actually are like comic books that are published like with basically like with a more child friendly veneer to them. So you can certainly like check those out. But certainly like just in general, any story about a superhero, it's a story about sacrifice and doing the right thing. So, of course, if you're trying to teach your children about that, it's a great way to teach them about that. But that could be a topic for one day if we ever get Professor F back on the show as a teacher.
Yeah.
So thank you for suggesting that. And we have this other message we received.
Hey, AJ and Pixel.
Well, wait, who's this one from? Because they didn't ask to be anonymous.
Oh, this is from Elizabeth Fitzmaurice, my fiance.
What? You can't give out her real name like that.
Well, you just said who's it from.
Yeah,
she doesn't have a name.
Yeah, but you didn't have to say she was your fiance.
Oh, all right. Well, you know what? I'm proud of.
You're about
having
as
her.
good at hiding your secret identity as Matt Murdock in the 2003 Daredevil
oh, no.
movie.
Now all my enemies will find out about me. You know what? I'm proud of having a geeky fiance. She is my favorite. So let's read out that question. Hey, AJ and Pixel, I have a topic for you. Listening to your recent Hellboy episode with Minty Python, I'm assuming it's a play on Monty Python. You got that. Got me wondering, what are your thoughts on cult classics? What makes a cult classic? And are there cult classics that you two are fans or not fans of?
I think the broadest definition of a cult classic is just a movie or a show that, when it was released, did not find commercial or critical success.
Yeah, and then slowly built over time. Like, I think the most infamous one is The Room. Tommy Wiseau spent $6 million of his own dollars. It didn't make back the money. So funny, Mark. And then years later, now that it has a cult following, has finally made its money back.
I don't know if it's done that, but I think the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which is a movie I've never seen, but I understand it did not do well when it came out and has gained an audience since then.
Did Monty Python do well when it came out?
I'm not sure.
Ish. Well, I think that would be my cult classic. I'm not a fan of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, like from what I know of the content and the story. I'm not a big fan of Pulp Fiction. It's just one of those. Yeah, I think Monty Python is like my cult classic.
Yeah, let's just throw this in the bat jar for a topic because I'll need time to think and research
a pretty big
that
one.
more.
Thank you for the message.
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. So if you, like Elizabeth and our other emailer, would like to get a hold of our show, we can tell you how to do that.
All right. So if you want to contact the show with a question or idea for an episode, you can send us an email at
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
And as you can tell, we are receiving them and we are reading them. So do it. Or you can tweet us at
the Bat Cookie Jar.
Yeah, and that's on Twitter. Use your tweets. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, SoundCloud, wherever you get your podcasts. Share our post on Facebook. That actually really increases the amount that we're able to be seen by the world. Even Matt Murdock could see us if you shared us on Facebook eventually. We'd make our way to him. And plus, we're a podcast. He'd love us. And like our page, because we want everyone to join us inside the Bat Jar.
Inside the gritty
2003
narration
emo Bat Jar.
Oh, we didn't even talk about the music.
Yeah. Oh God. Evanescence. Just look up Evanescence, and you'll
Evanescence.
Evanescence. Evans Naissance, which is the French
Wake
word.
me up inside.
We should just exit out with that song at the end of the podcast. Anyways. Oh God.
Oh yes. So we're not going to go into the Bat Jar for a topic because next week is, I guess, the first video game movie of the year, and it's looking like it could be
pretty darn good.
And it's not saying much to say it could be the best video game movie ever, because video game movies are like one of the...
They could make a cool Metroid movie. But yes, let's continue on.
Anyway, next week, Pokemon Detective Pikachu. Can't believe this is actually a thing that's happening.
Is coming out to theaters, and I'm excited. I'm surprised that I'm excited, but I am pretty darn excited.
Surely, have you played that game before?
I have not. I've played about a quarter of the Pokemon games because there's so many, and I have never played any spin-offs other than Pokemon Snap.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're going into this blind, so come back to the Bat Jar podcast next week when we enter the world of Detective Pikachu.
Pika Pika! With Ryan Reynolds as the voice. Oh my gosh.
And until that time, I'm Average Joe.
I'm Pixel Patch.
Catch you on the flip side.
One pixel at a time.